Hi, Chris. How are you
Hey,
doing?
I am good. How are you? Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm doing great. Sebastian sends his apologies. He can't be with us today. He's stuck in transit. But we are going to have a great session about COP30 and CDR nevertheless. So you have been busy, I think, over the last 9 months or so, as the carbon removal lead with high-level climate champions.
Yep, since April
Now,
1st. Yeah, I
since
started.
April 1st, exactly. So, what has this been like? Because previously you weren't really part of what's happening with the UNFCCC. Um, how how has it been for you? Is it what you expected? How is it different?
I didn't quite know what to expect, to be honest with you. It was, as you know, I've been in carbon removal for, I can't believe, coming up on 9 years, I think, this summer, which is a long time. And I've worked in a lot of different roles, but a lot of that has been as a policy advocate for state level policy. But I've also dabbled quite a bit in some stuff that's more international in nature, at least outside of the United States. And so to enter something that is so this just edifice of the COP and all of the different actors that are involved, and to join an amazing team at the Climate Champions, my colleagues, it did feel like a bit like a different universe. It was sort of a steep learning curve in the beginning to kind of get the ropes and then jump right in because, shortly after I started, really the serious planning in earnest for COP with the Brazilian presidency started. So it was sort of learning on the job. But yeah, it's been great. It's been crazy, but it's been a lot of fun and I've learned a lot.
So, how much freedom does the high level champions team have, and how are they actually tied to the COP process?
Yeah, it's been a little bit different this year, I'm told, compared to years past. I mean, previously, what the climate champions are really all about are mobilizing behind, elevating, tying together the non-state actors that are coming forward with, big announcements or initiatives or new ambition at the COP. So very, very separate from the negotiation process, and that still remains the case. This year, what we're doing though is we've worked really just in lockstep with the Brazilian presidency, really in support of them in the development and delivery of the action agenda in a much more hands-on way. And so that has been pretty amazing, I would say, to be that directly sort of behind the curtain, sort of looking at how this is coming apart, or rather coming together. And this COP has been different in the level of engagement and inclusion in the development of the action agenda. So there's this, shortly, through our conversation, I can detail it more, but there's 30 different key objectives that span across all the different, major axes that that the Paris Agreement is focused on. And to be working with IGOs and NGOs and industry organizations and academic experts in each one of those to develop what are the main things that we want to focus on implementation. And that has been just amazing. I mean, it's been incredible to see come together. So we're very much in the service of the Brazilian presidency and the development of all of the different parts of the action agenda and their delivery at Belém and beyond.
So basically, all the stakeholders of the UNFCCC are also feeding into this agenda. So I will just quickly kind of recap that the what agenda are we talking about? Because those following the negotiations know that there is the COP. Well, there is a negotiation agenda that spans through different yeah, parts of COP. I mean, some agenda items related to Paris Agreement, some still related to Kyoto Protocol. So there are different streams. I mean, those following removals probably have heard about Article 6, which actually is not going to be negotiated at this COP at all. So that's the formal agenda. What we are talking about here is the action agenda, which is, I would say, can we call it more like an informal agenda of everything that will happen in parallel with the negotiations, right?
Yeah, formal though, I would say, but just
Still formal.
multi-party. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot. I mean, it's not something that goes in and directly affects the agreement itself, but this year in particular, the action agenda is really wed to key parts of the Paris Agreement, like the global stock take, and it's about how do we implement the things that we know that we need to do in a sort of a next level in partnership with initiatives all over the world. So it kind of in a way more directly ties the action agenda to the core substance of the Paris Agreement. Um, if that makes sense. It's different this year.
So I was reading through my notes, or actually my blog posts from COP28, which was the one where the global stocktake, the first global stocktake was concluded, and the text there was kind of weird on removals because there were bits and pieces on kind of CCS and removals, and then there was something on ocean removals, and then there was some on forestry, but it was kind of a little bit of a patchwork. I guess you have been looking at that and then figuring out what to do based on that. So, where are removals in the action agenda? I actually opened up what was on the presidency website and I couldn't find the word removals there. Maybe I didn't know where to look. Guide me.
Yeah. It'll pop up on Friday, I believe it goes published. So what you see on the site so far right now is the overall structure of the action agenda and then some words that are actually quite good, some pieces of content about how is this different, who was involved this year. What you see on the site right now are the 6 axes, as they call them. So these are major groupings. Transportation and industry and energy are one, and then nature and oceans, and the built environment. So these are these sort of bigger bubbles, and then within those, there's across all of them, there's 30 key objectives. So some have 5, some have 10. Depending on what it is, and these are much more specific. So for instance, is accelerating low carbon technologies for difficult to abate industries. That's a key objective. And within that, any one of those key objectives, there was an activation group that is led by a secretariat that includes all sorts of different groups from civil society, industry groups, IGOs, global development banks. And together they worked on the idea of, well, can we actually surface what they're calling solutions that are things that multiple initiatives participating in an activation group are coming together under a common theme to work together that is with its eyes towards delivering the results within the next 3 to 5 years, 3 being the next global stock take, and then 5 years will be when, the next round of NDC, updates. And so it's really, really focused on implementation. And so on that axis level, you're not going to see carbon removal in there. But when we go public with all of these different plans to accelerate solutions, as they're called, dozens of them, that's where you're going to start to see carbon removal pop up in title. And then you'll see in some of the other ones where it's relevant to carbon removal. So there'll be a whole other rich level of information that's about to go live right before the COP.
I see. Because when you described the 6 axes, I felt like, well, removals literally fits under each and every one of them, right?
And that's the way we want it to be. We don't want it to be that there's an axis or a bubble or another planet called carbon removal. For us, carbon removal is a thing that lives and takes hold within all these other established parts of the agenda. It's a piece of the solution set rather than its own, planet. And that was kind of my strategy coming to the climate champions, is to make that really, really clear. It's an embedded feature of the broader effort.
I see. So I feel some optimism that what we will see on Friday is going to be something much more comprehensive than what was the outcome of the global stocktake text, which means that by the time we'll have the next global stocktake, which is actually in 2027, which is not that far at all, right?
Yep.
Then hopefully, this implementation work that happens now through this action agenda will pave the way in a much more comprehensive way. Removals would be covered also in the next global stocktake in the formal negotiations and the text that comes out of that.
That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah, I think it's about trying to, as I keep saying, can we get CDR to the adult table of the Paris
Hmm.
Agreement and COP process, where it's no longer sort of orbiting around the edges, where we don't know quite how to talk about it or what to make of it, but could we fully install CDR within the action agenda, and then hopefully negotiations where there's an expectation that every year we're tracking and reporting progress and growing our ambition towards it, rather than it being on the outside.
So we're expecting to see kind of a comprehensive inclusion of removals within this action agenda, which is amazing to hear. How easy was it to make it happen in practice? Because I'm sure you had to do a lot of capacity building. How did you make it happen? Who did you have to convince? What worked? What didn't work?
Yeah, and again, as you'll see, the action agenda, it's very big and multifaceted. And so there probably will be obviously some messaging or preambling that goes on top of it that explains major themes, but you'll see carbon removal pop up at least directly in a couple really key parts of that action agenda. So I just wanted to make that clear. One is in the difficult to abate, decarbonizing difficult to abate sectors. And then the other one is in sustainable agriculture and land restoration. So these are two really key platforms where you want to be able to start talking about CDR. And to answer your question, I think certainly I didn't act alone. I had amazing colleagues at the Climate Champions who were just completely open-minded. Folks that are working on oceans, that are working on industry, that are working on the built environment. And whenever I went, to them to just do some education, or are you familiar with this or with that, they were wide open to it, to learn more. And so just having that kind of these open channels that were within CCT that I could pursue, was really, really key. The other just decision I made really at the very, very outset, again, was not to spend all of my time demanding that carbon removal in the abstract needs to be considered. It had to instead be something that could be brought down to earth and could go through the front door of the agenda as it exists. How does carbon removal relate to industry? How does it relate to agriculture? How does it relate to nature? And to think much more specifically so that we can show that carbon removal is all of a piece with the larger objective. And so that was my goal, is to look at the very specific rather than the very general. And so I sort of picked my battles there of where would be the smart places to really start that might get the most amount of buy-in. I think with the Brazilians, who are I think very unheralded in terms of their leadership on carbon removal already, not just their latent capability, that the ag side of it, like what they're already doing with ERW and biochar, and just the general fundamentals around, biomass conversion, the opportunities there, that was a good place to start to really try to do the capacity building and the knowledge building. And then the same
But
I
can
did as
I
well.
ask
Yeah.
a question in between, because I hear you mention biochar, enhanced rock weathering.
Yeah.
So as a carbon removal lead, like what was the scope of removals you were advocating for? Were these durable removals also, or all nature-based removals? So, for example, afforestation. Uh, what did you focus on here? Because I'm sure from Brazil's perspective, they're also very much into nature-based removals.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't focus as much on that. And part of the reason why on the nature-based, although it absolutely is a part of one of the plans that's coming out, is because there's such a robust discourse and work that's going around forest-based. There's many different sort of new initiatives that are popping up and things that will be negotiated as well around that. So I wanted to start more on the novel side, where there's less familiarity. This is what we do all the time, obviously, as carbon removal advocates, is to expand people's aperture. So again, I was pretty opportunistic in a way to look at, well, what are the different main subject areas that are inevitably going to be part of the action agenda, and what are the ones that are most easy to sort of communicate the value and the readiness of. And so with the eye of, then can you get this in here into the COP where people are talking about carbon removal beyond forestry, that creates a foundation for future COPs? That was really the meta goal I had, is getting it in there so it's no longer a foreign term. So there's an expectation that we can keep talking about it and growing what we're talking about at future COPs. And so again, it was just knocking on doors of who's most ready to sort of listen to this. And the agriculture side was one there was a lot of interest in early, but not the only one, which again, I can get into the other doors I slipped through.
but please do get through, get into these other doors as well, because it would be interesting to understand like which removals are likely to get, which removal methods are likely to get kind of, wind in their sail through this COP.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll just get into what I can offer right now. Again, I can't fully disclose what the
Sure.
substance of these two initiatives, but as I said before, there's two explicit areas of the action agenda in the form of these plans to accelerate solutions. They're called. These are multi-party initiatives that are focused on implementation. And CDR is the subject of two of them, and one is focused on agriculture and land restoration, and the other is on the difficult to abate sectors. And the one on agriculture is much more specific. Is that we said, okay, there's already traction around soil organic carbon and other nature-based ways of sequestering and storing carbon. But how do we get these other pathways that we know have enormous scale potential, enormous impact potential into the bloodstream so that they're talked about, there's more enthusiasm? And so the agriculture initiative is very much focused on accelerating, getting countries together to commit to accelerating the rate at which these pathways reach methodological approval for Article 6, for ETSs, and working together and putting more resources into it for that. So that immediately benefits those specific pathways, ERW, various different SOC, and biochar. The other one, and I could pause here if you have any questions on that, but the other one is much more broad because when we realized we were able to develop one of these plans in the difficult to abate key objective, that you're kind of at the heart of the matter. That allows you to be more generally speaking about the role of carbon removal vis-a-vis residual emissions. And so the goal of that one was to be very tech agnostic, but rather to instead focus on, okay, we all know in principle, based on the science that we have for years, that we're going to have to do removal. And there's some countries that are moving faster than others, some businesses that are moving faster than others. What we really need is a shorter term implementation target the kind that animates action, where between now and 2030, here's a level of carbon removal we want the world to get to collectively between governments and business. And what are the different domains or areas where we need to have the most amount of impact? And so for that one is really more about christening carbon removal as one of the big boys, something that we need to be accountable for every year. But the way we're framing it, it's actually quite tech agnostic. It names both highly durable and less durable, but we don't specify, DAC or BECS or this has to happen or that has to happen.
When you mentioned hard to abate sectors, and you mentioned, I'm quite sure you also said the pair residual emissions. It kind of takes me back again to COP28 when the global stocktake, the final text was negotiated, and one of the big things on the table there was defining what are the residual or hard to abate emissions, and it didn't work out in the end. We didn't get definition. Well, I don't think anyone was really thinking we will, although there was a lot of work done behind it, kind of explaining how it should look like. I mean, has this come up also in the context of the implementation now? Like, what actually is hard to abate? What are residual emissions?
Yeah, fortunately, we don't have to grapple in this particular initiative with exactly what that is. Again, I looked at the general subject of difficult to abate sectors and residual emissions is where most policymakers and businesses that those are the terms that they're thinking about the value of carbon removal, not reversing overshoot or deep planet restoration, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually around that. So for me, what we've implanted with this initiative is more, okay, as these specific definitions for what residual emissions mean are being continued to be worked out, there's still a knowledge between governments and businesses that they're going to have to do it in some shape or form, right? How do we accelerate the rate at which they make those commitments, where they develop strategies, where they integrate carbon removal into their overall net zero strategies? And so that is the goal here, is that we put a short-term target that we're able to get more and more buy-in from, where the outcomes is like, okay, well, this many countries now, a year from now, or companies have a CDR strategy that's built into the net zero, or this many countries have now put forward a carbon removal roadmap, or they've implemented something in terms of hard policy. That is the goal. It's to kind of animate the stakeholders on both the private and government side to start.
See, so 2025 is also the year that was a deadline for the next wave of NDCs, now that I'm listening to you.
Yeah.
So have you been tracking how the NDCs reflect the role of removals? And have you been kind of baking that into your work as well?
I am, and that is definitely, there's a team of volunteers with me, whereas I think we're up to, less than 70. I haven't checked, as of today or, since late last week, how many of the revised NDCs have actually come in. But, with the help of some AI and looking at it, we're looking at where are there the hooks, where are there countries that are starting to, if you just take the specific example of the coalition I was talking about around ag-based CDR, there we want to be able to sort through which are the countries that are really leaning on or depending on agriculture as part of their NDCs. And then again, with everything, how do we then embed carbon removals as something that makes the fulfillment of that NDC easier or more probable because of carbon removals? So before we get to Belém and have our roundtable event, which is the focus of this initiative on the 17th of November, that is something we're accounting for. Where is there a rough edge in the different NDCs where we could see this is naturally a next step for there to be a more serious articulated CDR policy?
Now I'm curious because, I'm sure you've used the team to help you with kind of digesting what's in the NDCs and to compare it, but you probably have opened a few of these documents yourself. What do you think of the NDCs and the formats that is being used today, and how do you think it should be, let's say, upgraded when it comes to reflecting the role of removals? Because I would say there's probably plenty to be done there.
Yeah. I mean, again, I always start with the assumption is that we're the new kid in the class, right? And as you mentioned at the outset, I've been doing CDR advocacy for years now. I've been a participant at COP as an activist, for 4 out of the last 5. But now being on the inside of it is a very different look. And I look at everything from, this isn't made for CDR yet. Okay. But how do we, with every year, get us into a position where it's a default that there has to be a negative emissions component of it. So I'm not looking at the current NDCs as they come in and expecting things that are optimal or ideal. What I'm looking at is how do we make COP30 as the moment where, again, we're at the adult table and we can start to change what's expected of the next global stock take, in 2027. So that you're right, the global stock take, very similar kind of somewhat boilerplate around, yes, we'll have to explore these later on. That we don't want to be the way that it's framed in the next one. And the same with NDCs. But I would be curious, Eve, to get your thoughts on if you were sort of, had your druthers and were able to upgrade the NDCs to be more CDR inviting, what would you have them look like?
I think the biggest challenge is that the format itself doesn't really request the level of specificity that we would like to see.
Yeah.
And obviously changing that requires going through the formal COP negotiations to actually negotiate new version of the template, which is a big undertaking. And as ever, it's based on consensus. And I'm sure everyone will have different views on the level of detail that is necessary on or unwanted and so on. So it's a tricky thing. I think what has come up a lot in this context is that we just need to have some countries starting to very clearly indicate, just basically, showing how it can be done. And then hopefully other countries will start using the same approach, because it's just something that becomes a thing that is done, and that's it. So we actually don't have that much time left, and I'm realizing we haven't covered quite a few things, quite a few big things.
I can come back too, Eve, if you want me at any time
Yeah.
to from Belém. I'm happy to
Well,
report that.
let's make sure that we get to the CDR Pavilion. But before that, there is one question that has come in live from Juha Lipponen. Hi, Juha. And he
You
is asking you, Chris, do you feel that now at COP30, CDR has been mainstreamed, or is it still feels like this new, element that just piques curiosity and is not necessarily yet as widely understood as we would want?
It's not as widely understood as we would want, but it's made enormous progress. When I think you might have even been there, Eve, when I think of going back to Glasgow, there was literally no mention, action agenda, negotiations of carbon removal, no content. There was a castle about 15 miles outside of Glasgow where all the CDR people got together and like, how do we get in there? And every year, both in terms of side event, action agenda program, as well as negotiations, there have been step changes, which reflect that we've been able to move the message forward, but it also reflects the change of CDR from something that was a scary graph, as I say, back in 2018, more like we need to do this, but it didn't have any content to it, to something that is extremely full, diverse, and fast evolving, right? There are more actors that are involved. So every year we have made really, really good progress, including last year. It was important negotiated outcomes related to CDR. This year is absolutely, I think, going to continue that trajectory. And we have other major milestones. And CDR, in two key parts of the action agenda, is going to have solutions that are produced from them. So I don't think it's the love whose name we dare not speak any longer. I think more and more people understand it. They're interested in it. And this, I think, will be a step change for it. And hopefully one that finally gets us. CDR it would be weird if it's not part of the action agenda and talked about in present tense terms. That's my goal and the goal of all the other initiatives that I'm working with on this.
Yeah, and I would say not only that, but also in the formal agenda items. I mean, it will hopefully in the future play a bigger role in global stocktake, also because of all the work you've been doing now, and that's still yet to come in a couple of years. And also mitigation work program where it has featured in the past, but it's a difficult track. But let's come to the really really big news that we have for the CDR stakeholders at this COP, and that is a dedicated CDR pavilion. Like, how much have you been involved with that initiative? Are you supporting, feeding into it in any way? Because that's a huge milestone. That's putting CDR on the blue zone map in practice.
Yep. It's just another indicator of, again, that growth. And yes, I have been involved in it, and real hats off to the negative emissions platform team and all of the other folks who rolled up their sleeves and did something that was pretty improbable seeming, in this kind of tough year, to actually raise funds for a CDR pavilion. And so I have been involved in that. And my goal has been more of what is coming from the inside of the action agenda, and how do we make sure that relates or cross-references things that are going to be happening at that pavilion. The pavilion for me is, if we're getting people from within the action agenda to be more excited and cognizant of CDR in principle, the pavilion is the one where it's the real world. These are the people implementing it. This is the nuts and bolts of what CDR actually really looks like commercially in science. So it's hugely valuable to have the pavilion there rocking content the entire week that we can bring people into to go to that other level of depth on like, oh, wow, this is really happening. This can really happen. So yeah, it's been amazing. I'll be hanging out at the CDR Pavilion probably the entire time when I'm not, at another event. So it's a big deal.
Cool. So those of you who are going to Belém, check out the CDR Pavilion. You might actually get to see Chris and then catch up there.
I'll be there.
So you've been doing a lot up until now, since April. There are big announcements coming on Friday, which is basically, we're recording this on Monday. So yeah, a few days from now. What happens next? And also, will you be continuing in this role leading up also to the next COP? Can you maybe elaborate on that?
That's the plan. Because for me, my own personal goal is, it's one thing to implant CDR at this COP. The second one is the biggest one, because then a pattern happens, right? So for next year, we want to have even a more full-fledged, articulated presence at COP within the action agenda and events that correspond to that. So I think it's getting the fire started right now, the kindling, the expectation that there's going to be more ambitious stuff that's announced towards a 2030 target next year, and to give that a new home at the next COP that's even more sophisticated, has more moving parts, more actors. So that is definitely my goal, to be involved. And I think what will happen, that's why I would love to come back on the show, maybe even just post COP, because the
Yeah, we'd
initiatives
love
that we're
it.
doing have very specific things that get rolling immediately after COP. And so I can explain those in more specific details, but there we're going to need everybody to kind of really join in on that, and row in behind.
Oh, thanks so much. We'll make sure there's going to be another one of these after COP so we can delve deeper into the different initiatives. Well, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Chris. Immensely helpful. I'm actually so happy to hear that the work done under the action agenda can, in practice, have real impact on the global stocktake and what will be on the table next time around in 2027. So there is a very clear link between what's happening under the action agenda and how it can feed into the negotiations in the future. So it's not only something that's happening in parallel and stays there, there are actually synergies in between the different tracks. Yeah, I mean, thank you for all the work you've done so far. I know it has been an immense amount, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you how it all went and take stock of what happened at COP for CDR. Thanks so much.
Call me anytime. Yep.
Yeah, thanks.